The horse saw him, and it did not run. It lifted its head and watched. Then the rest of the herd turned with it, ears forward, bodies tense, holding a careful distance from the thing that had come to hunt them. He had seen horses scatter from lions. He had watched them flee wolves. But with him, there was a pause. The lion got flight. The wolf got flight. He got study. As though the herd was not deciding whether he was dangerous, but what kind of danger he was. He stood in the grass beneath their eyes, slow, soft-bodied, without claws or killing teeth, yet carrying a weapon that could reach farther than any predator's jaws. They feared him, but there was something else mixed into the fear. Uncertainty. He had seen that look his whole life. The animal world treating humans not as stronger or weaker than the other hunters, but as something different. A problem it had never completely solved. What did they think he was? What does an animal actually see when it looks at a human being? Every animal moves through a world it has already mapped. That map is mostly inherited. A set of ancient categories, written into the body across millions of years, telling it what each shape and scent and sound means, and what to do about it. Predator. Flee, or freeze, or fight. Prey. Pursue. Rival. Threaten. Mate. Approach. The map is old and efficient, and for nearly everything an animal meets, it works. It has to work. There is no time, in the half-second a shape appears at the edge of the grass, to reason it out from scratch. The animal that survives is the one whose body already knows the answer before the mind has asked the question. We do not fit the map, and every animal that meets us has to solve that fresh, because we come wearing two signals that should never appear on the same body. We look like prey, soft, slow, upright, weak-jawed, clawless, the least threatening shape on the landscape. And we behave like the most dangerous predator that ever lived, appearing harmless and killing at a distance, running slower than everything yet catching everything, arriving in weak-looking little groups and somehow bringing down the mammoth. Prey and apex predator at once, and no animal's ancient wiring is built to hold both. Think about what that does inside the animal's mind. Every other creature it meets resolves cleanly into one category, and the body acts. We resolve into two, at the same instant, and the two answers point in opposite directions. Approach and flee, ignore and run, the harmless shape and the killing one, firing together and canceling out. The result is that pause. That is what the hesitation actually is. Not calm, not curiosity exactly, but a mind jammed between two answers that cannot both be true. So it improvises. And that improvising, the flicker of uncertainty, the study instead of flight, is the animal world trying, and failing, to file us under something it already knows. We broke the categories, and a creature that cannot be categorized cannot be simply feared or simply ignored. It has to be watched. That confusion was not harmless. In the deep past, it was often fatal, and the fatal part fell on the animals, not on us. Consider what an animal's map is for. It exists to produce the right action fast, to fire flight before the lion is close enough to matter, because the animal that pauses to think is the animal that dies. The whole value of the inherited category is speed, and against every ordinary predator, that speed is exactly right. Against us, it failed in both directions, and both were lethal. An animal that filed us under not a serious threat, that saw the soft, slow body and let us approach, curious rather than afraid. Let us walk into range of the thrown spear, and died for the miscategorization. But an animal that filed us under ordinary predator died too, because the defenses that work against a lion do not work against us. Outrun the cheetah and you live. We do not need to catch you. We kill from 40 paces. Cluster into a herd for safety, and you defeat the wolf. We simply pick the herd apart from a distance it cannot close. Climb where the big cats cannot follow, and we bring you down out of the tree with a thrown stone. Every inherited defense the animal owned was built for a different kind of hunter, and against the strange new thing, the old answers got them killed, and there was no time to invent new answers within a single life. That is the cruelty of it. An animal cannot reason its way to a defense against a threat it has never seen. It can only inherit one, slowly, across generations, written in the deaths of the ones who guessed wrong. The first creatures to meet us had no map for us at all, and paid for that blankness with their lives. The ones that came after inherited a little more fear, a little more distance, a little more of the right instinct, bought entirely with the bodies of the ones who came before. This is the deadly education the animal world received from us, over tens of thousands of years. The creatures whose maps said the wrong thing about humans did not pass on their maps. And slowly, across the generations, the survivors were the ones who had learned to file us under something new, something that had never existed before we did. A category the horse in the grass was, in its own way, still building as it watched him. And the first shape of that new category was pure, cold fear. Move through a day at the hunter's side, and you can watch the animal world reacting to a thing it has decided to be afraid of in a very particular way. The birds went up before he crested the ridge. Not because they saw a predator. They saw an upright shape, and the upright shape had come to mean something. The grazers on the far slope lifted their heads at a distance no lion would have triggered, because a lion has to be close to be dangerous, and he did not. Everything adjusted its spacing around him, kept a margin, watched the tree line where he might be. He moved through the landscape inside a bubble of wariness that traveled with him, and the size of that bubble was the measure of what the animals had learned we were. And the size of that bubble is telling, because it is enormous. Measure how close a wild animal will let a lion come before it moves. Then measure how close it will let a human come, and the human number is larger, sometimes far larger. The animals hold us at a distance they grant almost nothing else, and they hold us there because they have learned, correctly, that our danger begins long before we are close. A lion at 100 paces is a lion you can watch. A human at 100 paces is already, potentially, within reach. The wild adjusted its sense of safe distance to account for a killer that did not need to close in, and that adjustment is one of the deepest marks we have left on the animal mind. This is the first real answer to what they think of us, and it is stark. To most of the wild world, across most of the time we have shared it, a human being is the shape of death, recognized not as a specific animal, but as a pattern, upright and two-legged. That means keep your distance or die. And they taught it to each other. This is the part that should unsettle you. The fear of us is not only inherited in the slow way, written into the body across generations. It is learned, fast, and passed sideways. A young animal watching its mother flee in upright shape learns in an afternoon what its ancestors took millennia to encode. The knowledge of us spreads through a herd, through a flock, through a valley, carried in the reactions of animals teaching animals what the strange two-legged thing does. We became a story the animal world tells itself, a warning handed from one creature to the next. And once that lesson is learned, it does not fade with our absence. In places where humans hunted hard and then left, the fear stayed, passed down through animals that had never once seen a person, a dread of the upright shape carried forward in creatures for whom we were nothing but an inherited rumor. We haunt the wild after we are gone. The fear of us outlives our presence, handed down the generations like a scar that keeps its shape long after the wound that made it has closed. He was, to the world he moved through, a rumor with a shape, and the rumor said run. And then, cutting against all of it, there was the other reaction, the one that made no sense at all next to the fear. Some of them came closer. Not many, and not most. But at the edges of the camp, in the dark past the fire, there were always the ones that did the opposite of flee, the eyes that approached the light instead of retreating from it, the scavengers drawn to the kills and the scraps. The bold, the curious, the hungry outliers who looked at the most dangerous animal on the landscape and moved toward it. Against every lesson the rest of their kind had learned, a few creatures decided that the thing to do about humans was not to run away, but to draw near. He had watched it happen slowly, over seasons. The same eyes, a little closer each time. The wariness worn down not by force, but by repetition. By nothing bad happening. By the discovery that the killing shape did not always kill. That single break in the pattern is one of the most consequential things that has ever happened on this planet. And it means at least some animals had reached a very different verdict about us than fear alone. Because the ones that came closer had worked something out, and it was shrewd. They had noticed what the fearful ones had not. That the deadliest predator on the landscape was also, strangely, the most generous. We killed more than we could eat. We left carcasses half-butchered, scattered scraps, cracked bones with marrow still in them, whole gut piles abandoned where an animal fell. To a creature bold enough to overcome the fear, a human camp was not only danger, it was the single most reliable source of food in the entire world. Follow the two-legged killers, and you ate what they left. And they left a lot. There was nothing else like it in the wild. Every other source of food was uncertain. The hunt that failed, the carcass already stripped, the season that gave nothing. But the humans killed constantly, and wastefully, and predictably, and a creature that learned to shadow them tapped into something no wild food source could match. A supply that did not run out, tied to the most successful hunters the world had ever produced. To follow us was to never quite starve. In a world where starvation was the commonest death of all, that was worth almost any risk. This required a genuine leap of animal intelligence. To approach us, a creature had to hold two contradictory truths at once: that we were lethal, and that we were worth the risk. And to thread the needle between them, staying close enough to profit and far enough to survive. That is not the simple firing of an inherited category. That is calculation, judgment, a read of a specific, dangerous, useful thing, and a decision about how to exploit it. The animals that managed it were doing something no simple prey animal does. They were treating us not as a force of nature to flee, but as a relationship to be managed. A powerful, dangerous neighbor whose habits could be studied and turned to advantage. They learned our rhythms. When we hunted, when we slept, how close was too close, which of us to watch and which to ignore. They built, in their own minds, a working model of us. And a creature that models you is a creature that has stopped merely reacting to you and started thinking about you. He saw the eyes at the edge of the firelight most nights now. They did not attack, and they did not flee. They waited, and they watched, and they calculated. And he was beginning to understand that the animals doing the calculating had seen something in us that the fearful ones never had, and that this seeing was about to change both of us forever. Step back from the drama of fear and hunger, because the strangest thing an animal does when it looks at us is quieter than either. It happens in the pause. Watch the horse again in the moment before it decides. That hesitation, the lifted head, the forward ears, the study, is not nothing. It is the look of a mind trying to read another mind. An animal fleeing a wildfire never wonders what the fire wants. It treats the fire as a thing that merely happens. But it does not treat us that way. It has learned, over and over across the generations, that this creature has wants, that it looks at you, chooses you, decides about you, and that reading those decisions is the difference between living and dying. This is subtler than fear, and it runs deeper. So they watch our eyes. Many animals track the direction of a human gaze, the way they track almost nothing else alive, because where we are looking tells them what we intend, and what we intend is the only thing that matters. They are not just afraid of our bodies. They are reading our minds, as best they can, because we are the one predator whose mind they cannot afford to ignore. And they read more than the eyes. A wild animal near humans watches the whole of us for intention. The set of the shoulders, the speed of the walk, whether the gaze has settled on it or slid past. It knows the difference between a human who has noticed it and a human who has not, and it will hold its ground under a gaze that is merely passing while bolting from a gaze that has locked on. That is an extraordinarily fine reading of another creature's inner state. It means the animal is not asking, "What is that shape?" anymore. It is asking, "What is that shape about to do to me?" and answering, from nothing but the tilt of a head and the line of a stare. And that is a form of recognition. Not friendship, not love, but an acknowledgement written into their behavior that we are the kind of thing with a point of view. A someone, where everything else in their world is a something. In the whole of the wild, we are the neighbor they cannot stop trying to understand. There is a strange loneliness in that, when you turn it around. Every animal is surrounded by things, grass, weather, water, the blind machinery of a world that does not regard it back. We may be the first thing many of them ever encountered that regarded them back. The first gaze in their world that was also a mind. And they answered the only way they could, by learning to look into it and read it and never quite look away. And a few of them took that understanding somewhere no animal had ever gone before. The eyes at the edge of the firelight did not stay at the edge forever. Across a span of time longer than any life, the boldest and calmest of the scavengers drew closer, generation by generation, until some of them were no longer visitors to the human world but part of it. The wolves that became something else. The creatures that stopped calculating us as a dangerous neighbor and started treating us as a pack. They crossed a line no animal had crossed, from managing a relationship with humans to belonging to one. And here is what their crossing reveals about the verdict of the animal world. Because to move toward us like that, permanently, a creature had to answer the deepest question an animal can ask about another. Are you safe? The fearful ones answered no, and kept their distance, and lived their separate lives. But a few looked at the most dangerous predator that had ever existed, the killer of the mammoth, the shape that meant death across the whole landscape, and reached the opposite conclusion. That behind the danger was something they could trust. That this lethal thing could also be a protector, a provider, a member of the same group. They looked at us and saw not only a threat, but a home. And the ones that made that leap did not only survive it, they were changed by it, from the inside out. A creature that lives alongside us long enough begins, over generations, to soften. Its body gentles, its face rounds. Its wariness gives way to a readiness to look to us for answers. The very act of choosing us reshaped the creatures that chose, until they became something that could no longer easily go back. Animals built, now, around the assumption that the human is safe, that the human will provide, that the human is the center their world turns around. They did not just decide we were home. They became creatures for whom we were the only home there was. That is an astonishing thing for an animal to decide about a human. And it means the animal world's answer to us was never a single answer. Some saw a monster, and some, looking at the very same creature, saw the safest place in the world to be. But both verdicts carried a shadow, and the shadow is the uncomfortable part. The fearful ones were right, and their fear was not enough. Across the deep past, animal after animal, species after species, learned to run from us. And still we caught them, because our reach outgrew their fear faster than they could adapt. The wariness that traveled with the hunter was the animal world's best defense, and it failed, slowly, everywhere we went. The creatures that feared us correctly still vanished, because correct fear was no match for a predator that kept getting better at killing from farther away. Their verdict was accurate, and it did not save them. This is the hardest truth in the whole story, and it deserves to be said plainly. The animals that read us most correctly, that landed on the right answer, that feared us exactly as much as we deserved, were not spared for being right. The problem was never that they misjudged us. The problem was that we changed faster than any animal could learn. By the time the fear of one kind of human weapon had spread through a species, we had already invented the next. Their fear was always calibrated to the hunter we used to be, never the hunter we had just become. They were running from yesterday's danger, and we were always today's. And the trusting ones? Their gamble paid, but at a price they could never have seen. The animals that came toward us, that decided we were safe, that led us into the center of their lives. They lived, and multiplied, and spread across the earth beside us, in numbers no wild creature ever achieved. But they also handed us the one thing an animal can never take back: their wildness, their independence, the freedom to be a thing unto themselves. They traded it for safety, and we accepted the trade, and remade them into whatever we needed. And something of the calculating, watchful, free creature that first approached the fire was slowly bred away in the bargain. So the animal world looked at us and split. And neither answer was simple, and neither was free. The ones that feared us lost their lives. The ones that trusted us lost themselves. Which leaves the hardest version of the question. If they were reading us that closely, all along, the fearful and the trusting both, then what, exactly, did they finally conclude we were? Go back one last time, to the hunter in the grass, and to the herd that would not run, but would not come close, because that frozen moment holds the whole answer. What was the horse doing, in that pause? Something no other animal on the landscape provoked. It was holding us as a genuine question, not filing us instantly under a known shape and reacting, the way it would to a lion or a storm, but stopping, really stopping, to read a creature it could not resolve. And in that stop is the truest thing the wild ever concluded about us, that we are the one living thing that cannot be predicted from the outside, not simply a predator, an unknown. Everything else dangerous in an animal's world runs on rules it can learn. The lion hunts when hungry and rests when full. The flood comes with the rains. The cold comes with the dark. All of it is readable, and a well-mapped animal survives by reading it. But we cannot be read that way. We are the creature that shares food one day and hunts the next, that walks past you harmless 100 times and kills you the 101st, that carries mortal threat and salvation in the same body. We are the danger that cannot be reduced to a rule, and so we are the one thing an animal can never fully relax around, never finish solving, never stop watching. And this is the thing that separates us from every other danger the wild has ever faced. A predator you can learn is a predator you can eventually live beside in something like peace. You know its hours, you know its range, you know the distance at which you are safe, and within those rules you can graze and rest and raise your young. The wild makes that peace with the lion. It cannot make it with us. Because the rules keep changing, because the same shape means kindness and death on different days, there is no distance at which an animal can finally set us down and relax. We are the one neighbor that must be watched forever, because we are the one neighbor that was never the same thing twice. That is why the fear always had study mixed into it. It is why even the animals that trust us still watch our eyes. We were never a rule they could learn and set down. We were the neighbor whose mind never became safe to ignore. So, what do animals actually think about humans? They think we are unlike anything else alive. Not the strongest, not the fastest, not even the most obviously dangerous, but the one creature that never fit the map, that looks like prey and kills like a god, and so has to be met fresh, mind to mind, every single time. Most of them landed on fear, a fear so deep it became the defining fact of their lives. A world-changing few landed on the opposite, and came toward us, and staked everything on the guess that the deadliest thing on earth could also be the safest. Two verdicts that could not be further apart. And yet underneath both is the same quiet finding, and it is the real answer to the question. Whether they ran from us or ran toward us, they were doing the same thing, reading us, treating us as a will and not a force, a mind and not a rule, a someone whose next move had to be guessed at rather than known. Fear and trust were only two ways of living with the one fact neither could escape, that we could not be figured out and set down. And perhaps that is the most honest mirror we will ever be handed. Not the verdict of our friends, who love us, or our enemies who hate us, but the verdict of a whole world of watching creatures who owe us nothing and cannot lie about what they see, because their lives depend on seeing us clearly. And what they see, after all this time, is a creature so unlike anything else that it cannot be filed, cannot be predicted, cannot be trusted, the way a lion can be trusted to be a lion. A thing of two natures, carrying gift and death in the same hands, that no animal has ever finished understanding. They do not know what we are, and that is precisely what they think of us. The animal that could never be solved, and so had to be watched forever. The hunter walked on, and the herd let him pass at its careful distance, eyes tracking him until he was over the ridge and gone. He never learned what they thought of him. He only felt it. The weight of being watched by a whole world that had decided he was something it could not name. And that feeling did not end with him. It is still there, in every wild eye that meets yours and holds, for just a moment, before the animal decides what to do. That pause is ancient. It is the animal world doing to you exactly what the horse did to him, reading you, weighing you, trying to solve the one creature that was never quite solvable. You have felt it, if you have ever stood still under the gaze of a wild thing, the deer at the wood's edge, the fox that stops and turns, the bird that holds on the branch a heartbeat longer than it should. That moment when the animal does not flee and does not approach but simply looks, and something passes between you that has no name. That is not nothing. That is the oldest conversation on earth, still going on. That is a mind on the other side of the gap, doing what its kind has done since the first upright shape crossed the first grassland, trying to read you, and deciding what you are. We spend our lives thinking we are the ones observing the animals. We forget that all along, from the tree line and the tall grass and the dark past the fire, they have been observing us, building their careful, wary, unfinished picture of the strangest thing they ever met. And their picture of us may be the truest mirror we will ever have. Not the monster we fear we are, not the master we imagine we are, just an unknown, upright and clever and impossible to predict, moving through a world that never stopped watching to see what we would do next. The eyes in the tree line are still on us. They always were. And they are still, after all this time, trying to work out what we are. If the strange view of ourselves from the other side of the firelight is the kind of story that stays with you, keep close to this channel. There's another set of eyes in the dark waiting, and I'd like you here when we meet them.